quite ready for. Some of you may be aware that we recently hosted a symposium at Fordham on the New Originalism. This is the symposium, actually, not the whole issue. This is just the symposium part. We actually told people to write a haiku on originalism, but as you can see, they weren't able to stay within that boundary. So it's about 500 pages. One of the interesting things, I think, that comes out of this, and pulling together the symposium, we invited both representatives of New Originalism, Old Originalism, In-Between Originalism. There are actually now as many flavors of originalism as there are Ben and Jerry flavors. And actually, perhaps over dinner, we can come up with some New Originalism flavors, like semantic meaning swirl or something appropriate like that. But in any event, we invited philosophers, historians, originalists of all shape and size, and temperament. And we produced, I think, a very, very good symposium. Keith has an excellent article. Bernie Myler has an excellent article. And what's interesting about it is the critiques of public meaning originalism, which come from very, very different camps. And I actually think that based on the critiques, public meaning originalism is a sort of in paradigm crisis. It clearly is having some serious problems. So the first critique, of course, comes from traditional originalism and is best represented by Larry Alexander's essay. And it essentially argues that New Originalism, as defined as public meaning originalism, because one of the other essays talks about new originalisms as opposed to new originalism, so now we're getting into that. But essentially, public meaning originalism is entirely parasitic on traditional originalist intentionalist theories. You can't really talk about meaning without intent, and therefore public meaning originalism rests on a pretty serious philosophical mistake. We actually invited two leading philosophers of language who also, although they were very polite about it, pretty much argue that you can't really talk about meaning without intent. And if you were pulling together a theory of meaning, you would likely not build it around semantics, you would build it around pragmatics. There is a sort of, in classic paradigm crisis mode, an effort to build more epicycles into the theory. So you see a lot of Larry Solom's essay trying to build in pragmatic features into what is essentially a semantic theory, I think not very successfully. And then, of course, my article is a traditional intellectual history critique of public meaning originalism, which both builds on the philosophy and established historical methodologies. And so I think pretty much public meaning originalism is dead in the water as a philosophical matter, although politically, like vampire movies in the 60s, where after killing Dracula at the end of the movie, he mysteriously always rose from the grave, there's just too much money invested in this, and too much power to ever go away. It's sort of like the Yale deconstruction at Yale in the 80s. People said, does it really matter? I said, well, the Yale endowment means it matters. So I think as just as functional matter, it's not going away, even though I don't think it has really much intellectual merit at this point. I think you can construct a spectrum going from originalist